Hey, welcome to FreeThinking Ministries. I'm your host, Josh Klein, and it's great to be with you here again. And I am also going to be joined by our fearless leader here at FreeThinking Ministries, Dr. Tim Stratton. We've got a lot to talk about here today, so I'm going to bring him up here. Dr. Tim, how are you this afternoon?
Doing great, Josh. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Just getting over a little bit of sniffles or something, but other than that, perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Perfectly fine. Yeah.
What's the weather like down the road in Omaha right now?
We've got cloudy and rainy and around 40. I don't know what it's like in
Okay,
your neck of the woods.
well, we just got hit with a bunch of snow, so it's coming your way. But it should be
Exciting.
melted it should be all melted in a couple days. But
Yeah.
you got that to look forward to.
This is spring in Nebraska, so
That's right.
everybody who come on down. That's why our slogan is Nebraska. It's not for everybody. It's not for everyone.
We like it like that.
Yes, yes, we do. All right, well, Tim, you and I have been talking a lot on this YouTube channel recently. Hopefully, we'll be talking about other topics sometime in the near future rather than politics and how a Christian ought to interact. But such is the time we'll live. I'm sure we'll ramp that back up around, October for some reason. But there's obviously a lot to talk about. It's interesting because we released an article that's been making the rounds. It is, as when I checked our metrics, it is our most viewed article by a wide margin in the last month, maybe in the last year. It's been read. Yeah, it's been read, I think, at this point, multiple thousand of times
Wow.
on our website. And it's probably because it has, now how many people actually read it, I don't know, because there have been a few people that have interacted with me that I'm pretty sure just read the headline, and that's how things work, right? But it's a moral obligation to vote for an immoral candidate. And as some might think, it is about why we as Christians, you and I specifically, as Christians, feel a moral obligation to pull the lever for Donald J. Trump this fall. Even maybe through gritted teeth. So we're going to talk a little bit about the reaction we've got. Some good reaction, some I wouldn't say bad reaction necessarily, but just some pushback. I think the only people I've gotten a reaction that just absolutely hated it are people that, for lack of a better way of saying this, absolutely hate me and what I stand for anyway. So no article was going to change their mind no matter what, unless it was mea culpa for the last 30 years of my conservative beliefs. But anyway,
I actually got to say that I had a surprising interaction with a guy that disagrees with everything I say, but actually found our article rather enlightening. So I want to talk about that here in a bit.
Yeah. So we will. Yeah, we'll get into that. We're going to get into some specific examples. It's interesting because as I think about the examples of this article, and we'll link it in the description below. So if you haven't read it, if you're one of the few people who hasn't read it, go ahead and read it, because we'll get into some of what we said there and explain a little bit more here today. But it's put together in the link below. But so I have friends across the spectrum of political ideology, as I'm sure you do. I don't like living in an echo chamber, and so I got a lot of pushback. I mean, one of the posts, the post on my wall had over 50 comments. The post on your wall almost had 100. So a lot of interaction. But I had some people say that we got Trump wrong, that he is a Christian and is just misunderstood. So I've had some people say that. And then on the complete, and that's somebody who's a strong believer. And then on the complete other end, a strong believer saying we got Trump wrong because not only is he immoral, he's a dangerous person and should never be allowed to hold office. So it's interesting, the polarization of this particular figure is so interesting to me. So we're going to get into some reactions. So first, why don't you let us know some of the positive reactions that you got? I'll talk about maybe some of mine as well, and then we'll get into some discussion of some specific
Mhm.
other content. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess before I share the one I just mentioned, I something you said got my attention there. I was contacted by a guy who read the article, who knows Trump personally, and this guy that contacted me said, "Look, it's true that in the past Trump's behavior has been reprehensible, but he has changed, and through his time in office, how he's been treated by the left. He doesn't. I mean, he'll say sometimes reacts, but according to this guy, he believes that Trump is actually a good person. He didn't go as far as to say he is a born again Christian, but he kind of left that open, I guess, a little bit. Now, I'd be surprised if that were the case, but this guy was. He actually, he disagreed with us a little bit because he thought we hit Donald Trump a little bit too hard, saying he wasn't a moral guy. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, what I found encouraging was that, and I'm not going to name this guy's, I'm not going to bring his name up either, but a guy that I've had so many interactions with on social media over the years. He's an atheist. He's extremely liberal, extremely left, I should say. And he posted something just a few days ago, really kind of accusing Christians of either immorality or inconsistency or just being hypocritical. And he said something like that he just could not understand why Christians would support a candidate like Trump, who is clearly whose actions in the past do not align with Christian moral values. And so I sent him a copy of our article that you and I wrote, and I thought, I mean, the two of us have had so many fights online, as it were, that I was just expecting him and his friends to just come back swinging. And surprisingly, he read the whole thing and he summarized it for me in his own words. And he got our point. And he said, "Hey, although I disagree with you, I see why you're going to vote for Trump and why Christians are voting for Trump in general. I see how you've reached your conclusions." And so that led to a nice conversation between the two of us. And one thing that we said in our article, Josh, is we talked about, hey, Christians, even if we disagree on this topic, no matter what happens, we need each other. And I actually said, hey, even though our article wasn't specifically addressed to atheists, I said, I still need you as my fellow American. I said, Americans need each other. And he loved that sentiment. And then he asked a really good question. Well, how are we going to live as the United States at this point when we are so divided down the middle? And I said, that's a really good question, but that conversation needs to be held in public by those who disagree with each other but are committed to loving the other. And I said, I don't know. I mean, other than say, okay, all the leftists move to the West Coast.
Yeah.
Everybody else move. Get out of the West Coast. We'll give you the West Coast.
Ideological segregation. Yeah.
Right. I don't know how to do it. But at least, obviously that's unrealistic. So I said, maybe the first step is just a commitment to loving and respecting the other that we disagree with, and having that conversation in public so that others can benefit from it and try to emulate our goals, So anyway, what do you think about that, Josh?
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging. Yeah, like I said, I think we got very responses all over, and one of the things that I hope we accomplished, and we were very careful in doing, and just to be clear, as we're talking about this article took a month and a half, maybe 2 months
Yeah.
to publish,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
We were not,
And it had lots of eyes on it.
yeah, and lots of eyes
Right.
that disagree. Yeah.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. We sent it to scholars, respected scholars who both agreed with it and disagreed with it.
yeah.
And we wanted it to be fair. And our tone changed radically from the initial draft to what we finally published. And
Yeah.
that's, thankfully that's what happens when it was definitely peer reviewed, and we took suggestions and made edits, and even the way I viewed things did change from the first draft. And I now, what I'm asking for people to understand me and you and many evangelical Christians on why we're going to vote for Trump. And my mind was changed. My heart was changed also, looking at the Christians who disagree with us and realizing that they're not being immoral or irrational. They're crunching the numbers differently. And I think I said this in the article, this does get us into the free thinking argument territory by how we're freely choosing to think, and what are we bracketing, what are we taking captive, what news outlets do we refuse to listen to, where are we getting our news, all this kind of stuff. Ultimately, it's crunching the numbers that leads us to different conclusions. But Josh, what you and I wanted to do, and what we wanted to offer, is our justification. We wanted to offer just our justified beliefs for why our justification for the belief that you and I have, that we have a moral obligation to vote for Trump, and we can't shake that unless offered powerful defeaters. That's just how epistemology works. For those of you that are new to philosophy, just following this because it's politics, this is epistemology is how we gain knowledge and the study of knowledge. And we're trying to explain why we believe that we know that you and I have a moral obligation to vote for Trump. But then we see that other people have crunched the numbers differently, and we see where they're coming from. And so we need each other. We can't fight each other and accuse the other of being immoral or irrational, but we should seek to reason together, Isaiah 1:18, for the sake of truth, for the sake of unity. And so I think our article did I think it accomplished that. I've received many compliments from it, even from those Christian and non-Christian who disagree with us.
Good.
They appreciate the tactics that we employed and how we went about it in a non-accusatory way, but we made our case. What do you think? What interactions did you get?
Yeah, and I think, and we tried to do it non-emotively. That's the thing about politics, is it gets very emotional these days. It's not just a debate about policy; it becomes about character and morality, and not that those are bad things, but sometimes it starts to become mudslinging the other person's character and morality, and that was something we wanted to avoid. Just some inside baseball for people as we talk about the genesis of the article, and you and I discussed it for quite a while, and I was probably more hesitant on it than you were at the beginning. We weren't. So you can read the article, say, hey, this is co-authored by two guys who are lockstep. Obviously, there are some nuances that you and I have that that we're not necessarily going to flesh out here, but we're not beholden to each other, right? So we had the same conclusion. I think we might have had different I don't know how to put it. Different like strength assessments, like out of 1 to 10, like how morally obligated do I feel from 10 to whatever. From 1
Yeah.
being I'm morally obligated to not vote for Trump, to 10 being he's the greatest guy ever. And I'm not saying you say that because you
Right.
don't.
Mhm.
But I was probably somewhere in the middle, and I remember having a discussion with you where I was like, I really considered voting third party this time. Like I really did. And so we reasoned apart from each other and came to the same conclusion. It wasn't you convincing me or me convincing you one way or the other.
No.
We kind of reasoned apart from each other, and we're like, yeah, um, I, I think this is where I land. Some of the things that I've gotten responses with, I had a long Facebook conversation with a dear pastor friend of mine who is, he's not to the left. I would call him conservative, right, but he's going to vote for third party. And so we had a really long discussion, and I think, and it was a good, productive discussion. It got heated, not angrily or emotionally, but it got heated in points, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
like point counterpoint. And we got to the point where I think we realized that our difference was in how we understood what a vote was. Like
Yeah.
like he thinks that a solitary vote, is always sending a message to the party in power. So when you vote third party, if you get enough people to vote third party, you're sending a message. And I told him, uh, I don't see votes that way. I see it as a tally for one person against another person in an election that will be decided, or who's going to help run the country. It's neither. It's not me sending a message. I even say this even when like presidents get elected and they say we've got a mandate from the people. That may have been the case a while ago, but more or less, I don't think votes are messages or mandates. It's just fine, I guess. this
Yeah. Right.
this is the guy. And not to say there aren't people who are like over the moon supportive for Trump. And frankly, I don't quite understand it. And to your point of the guy that you had the conversation with a little bit earlier, it's interesting because I've always said, since Trump got elected the first time, I was bewildered by it. I did not vote for Trump in the primary. I did grit my teeth and vote for him in the general in 2016, but I was floored that he was as popular as he was. I didn't understand because I didn't think he was actually a conservative. I thought he was just hoodwinking everybody. I thought he was just a show guy hoodwinking everybody. And I remember saying to somebody, I genuinely think that the way Trump is going to govern is who he likes most, he'll listen to most. And I don't know if he's changed from that or not. But I always said I thought that the Democrats made a horrible error with Trump, because what he wants is people to tell him how great of a guy he is. And I think they made a horrible error in telling him how awful of a person he is. And then he governed more conservatively than I think he would have if somebody would have just told him how great he was. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
true or not, but that's how I've seen it. But I don't see votes as messages necessarily. And if they are, it seems like our system isn't working because the message is constantly convoluted and hard to decipher. They could be messages, I suppose, on a smaller scale. I think you could see that at like for a mayoral candidate or even a congressional district. But for president, I don't think they're messages. I think they're tallies for, compared to this person, I think this person would be better to run the country. What do you think? That's kind of the conversation I had with him.
Yeah, I would lean toward your understanding of a vote. I also, as I tried to express in the part of the article I wrote, was that it's a use of our power. I mean, we have power a little bit. I said we each have one vote and a circle of influence, and
Yep.
with we ought to use the power we have wisely and in a loving way with our neighbors in mind. That's the second greatest command, is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And when politics or politicians are advancing policies that will harm your neighbor, then we ought to use our power, limited as it might be, to oppose those evil and harmful policies. And just read our articles or our article. We have a list in the footnotes of just getting us started on the evil policies advanced by the Democrat Marxist machine. And yeah, so I see our votes as a peaceful use of power. And if we can use peaceful power to stop evil, then I feel a moral obligation to use it.
Yeah.
If let's just say, in the article, I gave a thought experiment about if I'm on the road and my wife calls me and she says, Tim, a stalker is following me and now he's driving around the house. Do we, is it, or she's even scared that he might be there. Am I going to call the big, mean, uncouth, really strong and tough fighter that I used to do MMA with when I was an MMA coach? Or am I going to call my pastor? Nothing against my pastor. He's awesome, right? But who do I want defending my wife? If that stalker is really there, who do I call and say, hey, will you keep an eye on the house while I'm gone? Make sure my wife is safe while I'm gone. Now, so I'm going to use the power I have. I might be on the West Coast at the time, right? I have limited power in that scenario, but I'm going to use my phone call here and say, hey, will you please protect my wife? I know some guys that'll do that for me. I've earned their respect. They love me. I talk about that in the article, but they're not always nice guys. And I've seen some of their tweets and social media posts. Sometimes I'm just like, oh guys, that's not good.
Yeah.
All right. But I'm going to call that guy to protect my wife. I'm also going to call that guy to protect my neighbor. And so it's a peaceful use of power. If I say, well, I'm going to send a message by calling somebody else that can't protect my wife, but that's sure going to send a great message. Have I loved my wife? No. I haven't. Sending messages here at this point in history, at least as far as my moral compass goes, is why you and I feel that we have a moral obligation. We don't want to bind others, the conscience of others. But I would encourage people to rethink through these things. Sending the message that we ought to be sending right now is we're going to vote for the person who uses his power to fight for the deplorables, right? To fight for people that often get overlooked. To fight for people who agree with the theological foundations of our nation. To fight for what's right, even if he fights for what's right for the wrong reasons. So I guess that's to your pastor friend. I would respectfully and lovingly challenge him to rethink sending a message when your neighbor, loving your neighbor is on the line. For me, I don't see how sending a message is the most loving thing to do at this point in history. I think we need to send vote for the mean guy who's going to protect our neighbors. So what do you think?
Yeah, so there's been a little bit of pushback to that analogy, as you well know, right? One of the things that I've heard somebody say is, well, why wouldn't you still call your pastor? I don't think you're saying you wouldn't still call him. Like,
right.
It's not that you disagree with the power of prayer or your pastor.
Right.
Like, even if we're gonna hold the analogy together, say even if you're using your power as a vote, you're still going to use the power of prayer and asking your pastor, other people to pray for the movement in this nation.
Yeah. We ought to use all the power that we have, all of it. That includes prayer, right? But if my wife is about to be attacked, do I want the 300-pound beast of a man who's mean and knows how to fight to protect my wife? Or do I want the nice guy down the street who doesn't know how to fight? In the case of immediate needs, I'm going to call the tough guy.
Yeah, so
Right.
it's like you said, it's how we're crunching the numbers. Where is the need right now in our country, which is, I think, which gets us to the next kind of point that we receive some pushback on, and for people who don't know, I don't know what my mic is doing here. There we go. For people who don't know who wrote what in the article, that's fine. The good news is apparently Tim and I can write together well enough that you can't really pick out exactly who's writing what.
Well, honestly, I mean, we each kind of took the lead on sections, but then we would both kind of interject some things in those sections. So it did really kind of flow together. Our thoughts did.
And that tends to be how co-writing works well. But so I think one of the biggest pushbacks was, well, you're just bringing up Marxism because it's an easy target. Nobody likes Karl Marx. I don't know if that's true anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't think that's true anymore. Nobody should like Karl Marx's ideas. That's for sure. They're evil.
No, not his ideas. He was a good writer. But other than that, but you're just bringing that up similarly to how a progressive would bring up fascism to people who support Trump. And so what I see on some conservative side is a real focus in on January 6th, what Trump was and was not responsible for there. And I almost looked it up and I forgot to play the video. There's a skit video where a guy says, please make me stop defending Donald Trump. He's like, I didn't even vote for him, but please make me stop defending Donald Trump because so many lies about what he did and what he said have been out there over the last 7 years. And I'm not saying that with January 6th, but it seems to be that's where people point to. It's like January 6th points to the fact that Trump, if he got into power, he's a fascist and he's going to take over and never relinquish power again. And so that's the bigger threat. And we're honest. We said, I think in the article, we're honest. We said, we can understand how you got there. We can understand that you might get there through what you've seen or read or believe. We think that is so far out of the realm of possibility that it's not even really a metric in my mind of is Donald Trump going to take over. And so this is probably the most difficult part for me in the article because I'm trying to articulate the fact that even if that were to be the case, which party stands a better chance at standing up to somebody who's going to grab for authoritarian control? And it seems to me, and I'm not saying the Republicans would succeed or do it. It seems to me, given history with Donald Trump and the Republican Party, Republicans are actually more apt to step in than Democrats would be because they're very lockstep. And people say that that's not the case because they point to someone like Joe Manchin. And I suppose you could say the same thing for us because we might point to someone like Liz Cheney. But there's more than just Liz Cheney. There's a lot of people that will step up and call a strike and a ball when it comes to Donald Trump's behavior. Me being one of them. I don't agree with everything that he said. I don't agree with how he handled January 6th. I thought it was stupid, reprehensible, and it gave people undue leverage against him after a summer of riots in the streets on the George Floyd protests. One right-wing riot stole the show and became the authoritarian because it was in the Capitol and it was awful and it was stupid and people shouldn't have done it. Even if you believe some of the conspiracy theories that Capitol Police were just letting people in and encouraging them and whatever, even if you believe some of that, it was abjectly stupid to go do it. I had someone tell me, well, I used to be just like you. I would have gone to that rally and I would have gone to the Capitol. I'm like, I've never been to a political rally and I will never be to a political rally. I talk about this stuff because I think it's important for Christians to engage in a society that encourages you to engage for the direction of the country. We ought to engage. But the funny thing is, I'm making this long form video with you now, but this is not the most important thing in my life. It's not even, it might not even be top 5. Like if Donald Trump loses, I'm not going to take to the streets. I'm not going to opine on X or Facebook about how everything's ruined, because I know who ultimately wins. And so the power that I used didn't get the result that I wanted, but the result that I know exists in the future with Jesus Christ's return is so much better anyway, that I'm just going to move on with my life and fight the good fight. So I've said a lot there. But anything that jogged your mind in response to, the January 6th stuff, saying, oh, you're just saying Marxism because other people will call you fascists, and so it's just mudslinging back and forth.
Oh, well, I just think that both Marxism and fascism are evil, but those aren't our only options. That's often offered as kind of a dichotomy, but it's a false dichotomy. And Christians, and in fact, I would say good Americans, based upon our philosophical and theological foundations, ought to oppose both Marxism and fascism. We ought to oppose communism and Nazism. Two things can be true at once. We can oppose both those things. We don't have to affirm either one. And I do oppose both. I think when Antifa, is it Antifa or Antifa? I don't know.
They're supposedly anti-fascist.
Anti-fascist, yeah.
But Antifa.
I'm anti-fascist. I'm also anti-Marxist. I'm anti-Satan. So I was like, yeah, I'm anti-Mufasa, I think. Anti-Mufasa.
So you're Scar.
That's right.
Scar. Yeah.
That's right. No. But I can be against all that stuff. And we ought to be as Christians and as Americans, even as a based upon our theological foundations. Did that answer your question?
I think so. Well, sorry, it was kind of long and convoluted. One of the things that I'll say is I do, like you said, I do think it's a false dichotomy. And part of the reason I think it's a false dichotomy is because, and I think I said this in one of the Facebook threads, I do think there's a historical line from some of the things that Joe Biden is producing and running his government through and according to, and Marxism. And I don't think it is too much of a stretch to get there. Now, to call Trump a fascist, I suppose he could be, but I need better evidence than January 6th for that to be the case. People will bring up things like book bans and stuff like that. And I said, well, what kind of books are we talking about?
Right.
What kind of books are we talking about here?
Porn in school.
Pornography in elementary school libraries is not a free speech issue. Pornography in any so people might call me fascist. I'll say pornography in any library. I'm going to go even a step further. Pornography in any public library should be illegal.
Amen.
There should not be pornography in. Now, I'm somebody who thinks pornography should be illegal just outright.
Right.
But so I guess maybe, are you saying that makes me a fascist? And that is not Donald Trump's position either. In fact, given his limited moral framework and his sexual past, I don't think he probably has a problem with pornography. As far as it being illegal, whatnot, he might have a problem with pornography, if you get what I mean. But the point I'm making is, and I do want to make this point too, because there have been people. I'm a big fan of Dr. Neil Shenvi and the work that he's done. And I think there are people that assume that my opinions on DEI and critical theory come directly from Neil Shenvi. And Tim, you and I have had conversations on critical theory and stuff like that for years. And I think I only just recently brought up Dr. Shenvi's name in my discussion on the topics. And I've engaged with, now I'm not a scholar, but I have engaged with the scholarly sources on those issues. And I think Neil Shenvi is right. There are those who will say he's misrepresenting. So there was a conversation back and forth on one of the Facebook chats. And then Dr. Shimby actually ended up getting involved in that conversation about
with you, right?
Yeah, with me, and then somebody else that was on the that was saying that his work was not.
Yeah.
But I wasn't included in the conversation as well. But the conversation went to the fact that he was supposedly misrepresenting critical theory according to critical scholars, but there was never any specifics given. There were articles that were attached that said, "Oh, go check out Dr. Levinson," or go check out Dr. Levinson, or I'm blanking on the other guy. He's fairly well known, Bradley Mason, Dr. Bradley Mason, and their takes on Dr. Shimby's work. And it's interesting because I've read all of those guys, and I actually and I said this. I said I side not because I just blindly follow Neil Shenvi. I don't know. I've interviewed him one time on this channel. I've talked with him a little bit on Twitter. Him and I, that's the extent of the relationship that we have. I've read one book by him, multiple blog posts, followed the critical theory back and forth pretty well because it was really well done, and they conceded some points. It was a good online debate. Well, I'll actually link it in the chat. It's a 12-part debate that he did with Bradley Mason, and then he responded to Dr. Levinson, I think it's how you say it, as well. Suffice it to say, the whole point of it is the argument, as far as I can tell, is an argument of semantics to say, well, yes, the areas that Dr. Shimby says critical theory states certain things is true, but it doesn't. Those scholars, critical scholars, wouldn't say it in that way, or those aren't direct quotes. And Dr. Shimby says, yeah, I distilled it. That's the point. I took their ideas, and then I took their ideas, I surveyed them, and then I put them together into a distillation of this is the ideas. Say, yeah, but those aren't direct quotes. Well, no, the ideas, the distillation is from the direct quotes. Yeah. That's how it works, and that's what the primary sources are from. That's how the argument works. And as far as I can tell, the responses didn't necessarily pull the same amount. I mean, for Dr. Shimby and Dr. Sawyer's book, Critical Dilemma, they have 770 footnotes in a 500-page book. So all of that to say, sorry, I'm getting on a soapbox, I guess, here a little bit, but all of that to say that our conversation about critical theory and DEI and its links to Marxism and the Frankfurt School, which the Frankfurt School was called the School of Critical Theory. That's what it was called at the time. It was called critical theory. They were synonymous. And yes, there are different strands of it. That's why it's so hard to nail down. But generally speaking, the idea of equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not diversity, not in the sense of everyone gets the same opportunity and we have a good diversity of thought and diversity of skin color because everyone has the same opportunity, the same objective metrics to reach. That's the good kind of diversity, and not equality. Equity is equality of outcome. Equality is equality of opportunity. Now, we don't all have the same equality of opportunity because we're born in different areas, but generally speaking, if we average it out, an African American born to the same situation I'm born to has the same equality of opportunity as I do, or I do as they do. And then inclusion means not just include people to be nice, but to unfairly give certain people an advantage in spots that they don't deserve because they check certain boxes. That's what inclusion is. And so when Biden signs an executive order in 2020 and 2021 talking about infusing DEI into all systems of federal government, and I linked it in our article that's what he did, And then people say that I'm saying, oh, he's Marxist because he forgives student loans. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you're pointing to Trump being an authoritarian, you have to understand that Biden forgave student loans. It was called illegal, and he said, I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
So that's not me saying he's Marxist. That's me saying, be careful who you call an authoritarian, because it can be turned back on you real quick. The Marxist idea is actually the DEI initiatives in the federal government, and we can see this because who is the cabinet of the health? Rachel Levine.
Mm-hmm.
That's a biological man pretending to be a woman.
Yeah.
In a role that's supposed to be for the health care of the people of the United States. Mm-hmm. That is the opposite of health care.
Yeah.
And so we have somebody who denies their born sex put in a position like that purely because of DEI. And then we had another guy that can't remember his name now or his position. We did link it in our article, who ended up going to getting federally prosecuted because he stole people's luggage at airports.
Yeah.
Who was another kind of DEI selection. He had no credentials for it. And so what I'm saying in that, and I know I've talked a long time here, sorry. But what we were saying in that portion of the article was, for Marxism to be foisted onto a populace, it doesn't just have to be monetary or fiscal policy, although I do think that Biden's fiscal policy bends towards that as well.
Yeah.
But it can also be ideological. And it's easier to do it ideologically because you just have to redefine words, and then the Constitution can mean what you want it to mean. Right. And that's what I was trying to say. And I haven't seen meaningful pushback except for people saying, well, I read the whole executive order on DEI and it doesn't seem that problematic. To which I would respond saying, that's because you are reading it with eyes that are discerning the definitions of certain terms in the way that you've understood them, but it's not the way that they intend them.
Yeah.
And that's the danger. That's the danger. I've talked too much on this. What are your thoughts on what I just said? Or we can move on because I talked way too much.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The DEI agenda it's dangerous. It's not just immoral, it's dangerous. I mean, so DEI is it goes against merit-based, right? If you work hard enough, so we all have equality, like you said, is equal opportunity. So if you use your opportunity and you make good choices, this gets us into free will. If you make good choices and you choose to work hard enough, you have a great shot at victory and doing well in our nation. If you make poor choices, you won't do as well. And that's one thing with the middle class. What I love about the middle class is that it's not static. You're not stuck there just because you're born there. In fact, you're not stuck in poverty if you're born there. Part of my life, I was in poverty, right? And now I'd say, well, I'm in middle class right now, and I'm fine with being here. That's why I went into theology. I'm not going to get rich off of theology, right? But no matter where you're born, you can make good choices and move up the ladder, or if you can be born in the highest class and make horrible choices and find yourself in poverty. So what I love about equality is our freedom to make our own choices. Now, equity says no matter what you choose, you're all equal. No matter how you choose to live, same outcomes. And like you said, it's also about what boxes you can check. With the what color is your skin? How much melanin is in your skin? All right, check those boxes. What's your gender? What do you think? What do you feel like your gender is? Let's check those boxes. How do you dress? Are you? You might be a biologically born male, but do you dress like a woman? Okay, then that's going to help you out. All right. So if you start getting all these, what do they call that? Intersectionality.
Yeah.
these intersectionality boxes checked, then all of a sudden, hey, that makes you more qualified than this guy that's put in all the work to be your airline pilot, let's say. Well, that gets dangerous, right? Or to be your surgeon. Who do you want? Somebody that is, I mean, I've said this before. When I get surgery, I don't care if he's a Christian or not. I want to make sure he's the best at what he does, right?
Yeah.
That's who I want to be my surgeon. If he happens to be a Christian, great. But that's like the last thing on the list I'm looking at. The first thing on the top of the list is, do you know what you're doing? Do you have a track record? Can you show me that you've put in the work and that you know what you're doing when you operate on me? I don't care about anything else about you. But if somebody says, hey, he's not as good as a lot of people, but look at all these boxes he can check on the intersectionality list. Don't you feel great going under the knife now with him as your surgeon or him as your airline pilot? I'm like, no, I don't want that guy touching me or flying my plane. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And so it's funny because then that can be turned around and say, well, that's racist. Like, no, that's actually the exact opposite of racism.
Right.
To say, look, I don't care if somebody of a different skin color, different background, different whatever operates on me. I just want to know that they're not doing that just because they are that.
Right.
And that's the problem with DEI, purely in a pragmatic perspective. But I think there's a biblical component to it as well, because we're not to show partiality.
Mm-hmm.
That is outlined in Scripture. We're not supposed to show partiality to the poor. That's in Scripture. Don't show partiality to the poor. God wrote that into His law. And then it's also in Scripture to not show partiality to the rich. So we're not supposed to show partiality to skin color or race or ethnicity or richness or poorness. We are supposed to give everyone a fair shake. And the DEI is the exact opposite of that. And like what I said in the article, it borrows from or uses the same rationality that someone like Ibram X. Kendi does, who says that past discrimination can only be remedied by present discrimination, which can only be remedied by future discrimination.
And that's
so the idea
false. That's false, unbiblical, racist. You can't fight racism with more racism.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so. But if you look at the worldview that they're operating under when they redefine terms, you can see how they get to the point that they're getting. But what I'm saying is that it's completely antithetical to what we learn of the God of Scripture. And so I don't want a government that is going to forward that ideology and foist it onto people. I don't want my son growing up in that world. I don't want your son growing up in that world, or
I don't want my neighbor growing up.
Exactly. I don't want other people to have to grow up. I don't want the people who disagree with me ideologically to have to grow up in that world.
Right.
And so I think that's why we spent so much time on that part, because it can seem, Marxism can seem just like a word we throw out there. A lot like fascism can feel like now, or Christian nationalism can feel like now, but it is not. It is not. There can be direct links paid, and even if you don't agree with all of the scholarship, I think it's really hard to disagree with the fact that there are direct links paid. Even in his refutation of Neil Shenvi, Bradley Mason says, "Oh yes, all of those things are entailments or things that are inside critical theory. It's just they're also inside things that came before critical theory." Well, yeah, that's Marxism. And then before Marxism, Marx was very influenced by different philosophies. So yeah, it's not new necessarily, but it is an ideology that will rot a nation from the inside out. And that's why we're so vehemently against it. Perhaps we've beat that horse to death, but I think that was probably one of the things that received the most pushback. And I still right now think we made the best case we could in a short space. 4,000 words is still kind of a short space. if you don't believe me, don't take my word for it or Tim's word for it. You can read books. I would suggest Critical Dilemma. If you don't like Neil Shimvey, I would suggest Social Justice Fallacies by Thomas Sowell. No one can claim that Thomas Sowell is not an academic. Okay, the man's 90 and he's still pumping out books. So,
Wow.
So I would suggest those are great places to start. Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, a great place to start to understand exactly how we got to where we can say a man is a woman and a woman is a man, or what have you. But I think those are all policies that are forwarded by this administration from the top down. And so as Christians, you and I specifically, as Christians, we can't abide by that, even though Trump has said and done reprehensible and immoral things. So does that tie a bow on that part, or do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think so. Just to reiterate what we talked about at the top of the show, this article, I think the best thing about it is that it offers folks something that I haven't seen enunciated well elsewhere, is that the rationale, the justification, the reasons as to why many Christians believe we have a moral obligation to vote for an immoral candidate like Donald Trump. And so we cannot, anybody that reads that should come away, even if they walk away disagreeing with us, they should not be able to, or even want to point the finger and call us immoral, irrational, or inconsistent. I think we offered a good case, and we connected the logical dots and explained why, as Christians, we believe we ought to vote for Donald Trump in this weird moment of history. Yeah. So for those, I think this article is good for many Christians who they had this inarticulate grasp of these reasons, but they didn't know how to convey them. And it's something that you and I have been thinking about for years and writing about for years now. And so I think this allowed us the opportunity to share with Christians how to articulate these ideas that I think they were aware of. They just didn't know how to discuss them. I think it's good for Christians in that way. And I think it's also good for never Trumpers or non-Christians to see that we do have good reasons and we are rational when we're doing this kind of a thing. So I've received the vast amount of response that I've received from this article has been quite positive. And it's for those two reasons. And I've got that from Christians who didn't know how to explain why they were voting for Trump, but they felt it, right? They felt like they needed to. And I've received this from folks who are still never Trumpers, who disagree with us. And they say, now I see where you're coming from. I think that's a victory, a huge step forward in this discussion. And if we're going to bring unity into these United States of America, I think this is a first step that we've all got to take toward trying to understand the other person, even when we disagree with them. And that's one thing. When we worked on this article, I started to see the other side's position, even though I disagree with it. And so I think that's a first step to healing. So is this article the end of the, do we drop the mic and drop away? No, this is a good, I think, first step into a larger conversation. And I invite everybody to join us over the next year and further as we continue to talk about these things.
Yeah, and it's interesting because politics isn't fun to talk about. It's divisive and difficult. I've been called divisive over it. You have as well. There's a lot of people that think that apologists and people like you and I should just shut our mouths about this and only talk about gospel issues. And
this is, we're talking about how do you love your neighbor?
Yeah. And if honestly, and I heard, I'll just throw his name out there. I heard Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, say in a podcast recently, he doesn't dive into politics and stuff because it takes too much time. He's got other work to do and he doesn't care about it enough. And to which I say, good. Like, we don't need everyone doing this. And I think what IP does is super important. I don't want him to take a break necessarily from doing the things that he's doing. And even though maybe him and I disagree on some things, not maybe, we definitely disagree on some things. But the point of the matter is, we have decided that one of our goals is to help equip the church to engage the culture. And that means giving Christians tools to use to understand how to articulate or discern how they ought to interact with the political structure of our culture. That doesn't mean we're correct or right. It doesn't even mean they'll agree. But I think it does mean it's necessary to talk about these things. But one of the things that one of the mistakes I think people make is they say, well, this is your main thing that you talk about because we've made now a video on Christian nationalism and a video here. And it's like, no, they're just one-off. Like, these are the hot button topics right now. We're talking about it because this is what people are thinking about, and we want them to think well about it. Right? Yeah. We want them to take their thoughts captive. So we need to engage in this current moment and in future moments. But this is not making one video for an hour plus does not indicate the thing that we are most about, right? And I think that's Jesus Christ and him as King and him as coming back and him guiding our lives and hopefully winning souls to the kingdom of God. And so I think it's still important, though. Hopefully people can extend charity and say, oh yeah, you aren't just political shills. You're doing this in good faith. And this isn't the only thing you're concerned about, because I've received some of that. Well, all you talk about is, well, maybe that's all you read about when I write it because it makes you mad. I don't know, but
I mean, we're definitely more than one string banjos here. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about theology primarily. We talk about apologetics next, but the whole, the kind of the working mission of FreeThinking Ministries right now is to equip the church to reason together, Isaiah 1:18, by applying logic and sound theology to everything. So whether we're talking movies, which we talk about all the time, right?
Yeah.
Look at all the articles.
And you get made fun of for.
Yeah, I get made fun of it, right? Because I apply theology to the entertainment, right? To Marvel and Star Wars and things I grew up with. We then apply this to how to interpret Scripture correctly. Let's apply logic and to interpreting Scripture. How should we understand God's sovereignty and libertarian freedom and human responsibility, right? That's probably what I talk about more than anything else. This political stuff, I do care about because I do think ultimately that we're talking about how to love our neighbors and how to honor God with the votes that we have, right? Our use of peaceful power. We ought to use that responsibly. But we do that by starting with theology first. We don't start with our favorite politician or our favorite political party and build upon that. No, I see people on both sides of the political aisle do that. They start with either leftist ideology or conservative ideology or somewhere in between. And then they try to build a theology based upon their politics. And that is backwards, right? You don't build your metaphysics on your politics. You start with metaphysical reality and good theology. And then you build upon that. And that is why I left the Republican Party, by the way, during the George W. Bush era. Right. And so I'm not a Republican. I'm a free-thinking independent, but that is why, because I start with theology, with logic and sound theology. I start with that, and I come up with my metaphysical reality. I see what is probably true about metaphysical reality. I believe that God exists and that mere Christianity, at the very least, is true, right? That God exists and raised Jesus from the dead, and that some flavor of Christianity is true. Now I go deeper into that and get into what specific flavor I believe is true, but let's just start with mere Christianity, as C.S. Lewis put it. And from that, I start building upon that foundation. And with this foundation and what I built upon it using logic, as we explained in our article, that is why I believe we have a moral obligation to vote for Donald Trump in this weird moment of history. And so we don't start with politics. We conclude with politics. We start with theology.
Yeah.
So
so people will say, culture is downstream from politics or whatever. And I tend to agree that things that are working itself out in culture tend to trickle down to politics. But I think political engagement is a good thing for Christians. We're supposed to be salt and light. And salt preserves and light exposes the darkness, right? And so we're not just supposed to sit in the corner and not participate. I think we're supposed to participate, and we're supposed to do it to the best of our abilities, and to, as best we can, honor God with our choices in that realm. And so I think as we talk about these things, one of the things I said in a previous article, I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been in the Right Christian Nationalism article that I wrote, is our politics shouldn't influence our theology, but our theology should define our politics.
Yeah.
And too often, and some people might say, well, you're letting your politics influence your theology in voting for Donald Trump. And to which I would say, you got to read the argument, because the goal is to take the theological principles, salt, light, love your neighbor, apply it to the two candidates, recognize that I'm called to do what I can in order to accomplish those things in that realm. That's not all that I can do. I can also and should also be involved in my church, in my small group, in my community, and one of the things that we had a conversation about a lot was in our local community politics. It's almost more important for us to be involved in school boards and things like that, so that we can be salt and light and loving our neighbor there as well. So that's where the argument hinges. And it's not to say that we think all of Trump's policies are good, or that Donald Trump as a person is a moral or good man. And I think someone quoted before, when's the last time the United States really elected somebody that was of moral repute? And that's fair enough, right? Everyone has moral flaws. Now, Donald Trump might have more moral flaws than most. Okay. He's also been in the public eye for a lot longer.
Yeah.
But that doesn't disqualify someone to vote their conscience, what God's laid on their heart, as far as discerning whether or not they're being salt and light, and whether or not they're loving their neighbor in their participation. And that's why we talk about it, right?
Yeah. I mean, you look at President Jimmy Carter, who was the first president I remember in my lifetime.
I'm going to make you feel old. I don't remember him.
So. Yeah, I am older than you. But as I go back and study history, and I mean, he was a very moral man. I believe he was a Sunday school teacher, and took his Christian faith seriously. But his policies were horrible. He was a horrible leader, a horrible president. And this gets us back to why I don't care if I'm going to have surgery, or if I'm getting taking a flight. I don't care if my pilot or my surgeon is a moral person. It'd be great if he was. I just want to know, can he get the job done? Right.
Yeah.
and the same is true. I mean, Jimmy Carter was a great guy, but he couldn't get the job done. And I'm looking at Donald Trump and saying, you're not a great moral person, but I think you govern well. We had, I mean, you look at everything that happened before COVID, which was just unprecedented, right? But you look at, I mean, we had peace in the Middle East. The economy here was doing well. Things seemed to be going in the right direction in many ways. I think he can get the job done. And that's why I'm going to vote for him. I think he will fight for my neighbors.
Yeah. And so on the political aspect of it, and I'm much because of part of what I'm doing for FreeThinking Ministries in my own life, I'm much more ear to the ground in politics and stuff like that than most, especially with foreign policy and things of that nature. But I do see people saying, "Oh, his foreign policy is just going to be disastrous," because they point to out of context quotes about NATO and things like that. Now we're getting into the weeds of, oh, this is really politics because we're talking about foreign policy. But if you do look back at his 3.5 years of normal foreign policy, there are things that Trump did that I don't think people understand. He never spoke ill of a political foe on the international stage. He called President Xi a friend, right?
Even recently, he did that.
Yeah, just recently. Yeah. Why does he do that? He doesn't do that because he likes President Xi or he wants to be President Xi. He does that because he knows the way these types of guys think. And unless they think he wants to be their friend, there's no possibility of strong-arming them into not invading Taiwan, for instance.
Yeah.
And so he does stuff like that all the time, where he's so unpredictable on the international landscape. These guys go, well, this guy talks different, that all of a sudden peace deals are breaking out with the Abraham Accords. Right. All of a sudden NATO is becoming not funded 95% by the US government and is becoming funded 70% or less, and Europe is funding it more, and that's what his whole goal was. So Donald Trump sees everything as a business proposition, and he's a great businessman, but that means he just says a lot of stuff. And he says it to create a general feeling, and then he capitalizes on it. And so to take all of his words and say, well, he said it because he must really believe this. If you've ever bought a used car from a used car salesman, they'll say a lot of things to get you to sign the deal, right? No, might not mean he's a moral person. Could be a really good used car salesman. And I'm not saying we need a used car salesman as a president. I'm saying that it does take a certain amount of political acuity to understand exactly how to talk to foreign people, to foreign leaders, in order to get them in the place in America's best interest. And he seemed really adept at doing that. I remember people thinking World War III would break out under Donald Trump. No new wars were started. Now, a pandemic came. You can't blame Trump for that. Some people might try, but you can't. But now with Joe Biden, who supposedly is supposed to be able to talk to our foreign people and be respected, we've got war in the Middle East. We've got war between Russia and Ukraine. We've got proxy wars in the Red Sea and in the Straits of Hormuz, and with the Houthis. We've got overtures from China to invade, to blockade Taiwan and possibly install a puppet administration. So as you look at all of these tendencies, one of the things that I would say is, okay, even nothing else, who actually was effective on the foreign landscape, regardless of if you think his tariffs are a good idea? Seems to me Trump was more effective. I don't know. But I'm just a lay poli-sci person. So,
Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about this election is that we don't have to speculate about how one will govern. Both candidates have both been president.
That's true.
And so we get
unfortunately.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it's kind of cool. Like, well, okay, you're saying all this stuff about all the bad stuff that Trump's going to do if he's president, but let's look at what he did when he was president. And I think we were all better off at the time.
Yeah, and some people might say, well, he actually had people holding him back. He won't this time. You could be right, but I don't see the evidence for it.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to say in closing on the political side is one of the things I think the church has done a poor job, and I'll lump myself in that, is that we get really loud around this general election time. We need to do a better job of discipling people into why moral candidates do matter, even if we thought Donald Trump was unfairly treated and stuff like that. I would have rather seen DeSantis
Mhm.
win the nomination. I think he's a moral man. I think he talks kind of funny, but so does Donald Trump. That's just a joke. And I think his policies are more conservative than Trump's policies.
Right.
So I was disappointed, but people got so wrapped up in the emotional side of things that they're unjustly persecuting Trump, and to which in large case I agree.
Mhm.
I think we missed the forest for the trees, and conservative people that are involved in churches uh, and are in ministry are much less apt to speak out than leftist ministry people. I mean, you'll
Mhm.
see leftist ministry people downright, um, downright lift up Bernie Sanders um, or someone like that as somebody who would be a great person to vote for with no moral qualms, and they don't care what anyone says about them. Um, but for some
Now,
reason,
now,
we're not
I think
supposed
we
to.
got to be fair, though. I mean, we do see some right wing churches
Yeah.
that will
Oh
preach
yes, absolutely.
Republican,
Yes. Yeah.
talking points. It's
Absolutely.
yeah,
And it's abhorrent.
right,
Both of them are abhorrent to me. Like
right. Mhm.
I don't if my church invited Donald Trump to come speak on stage, I'd be like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
So I'm
right.
not talking about that necessarily. I'm talking about voices being weary of the voices who are weary of sharing on the right, on the conservative side, need to stop being weary, because then the really loud voices on the conservative side that are those voices that you just
Yeah,
mentioned are the only ones speaking. And so I think that's why we threw our hat in the ring here. It was like,
yeah.
here are some people who don't really like the options but want to weigh the morality of it. So
Right.
um
We wanted to take, as we said in the article, and be analytical theologians. Right. That means we're um, going to practice analytical philosophy, bring in sound theology, and be critical thinkers on this thing, and not be emotional. I
mhm,
think we were largely successful based on the responses
yeah.
that we received. So,
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to get to. So I had an interesting exchange on Twitter or X. I still call it Twitter. I don't know. I can't get
it's
it out of my
hard,
head.
you know,
Um,
old habits.
just Elon, just change it back, please. If somebody ran on that platform, they get elected.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting because we've talked a lot about this Christian nationalism thing.
Oh yeah.
And I've been accused of being a Christian nationalist again because of this article by a few people, which I think is ironic. Um, but I had this interesting conversation on Twitter where basically I just asked questions. So Charlie Kirk is speaking at Turning Point USA, or I'm sorry, Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA is speaking at Promise Keepers. Now,
Mm.
I'll be the first to say I don't think that's a good pick. I would prefer you not choose somebody who's clearly just a political voice to speak at a place that's supposed to be. Now, ironically, given what I just said, that I think conservative people should be more apt to speak up. This is not what I mean when you're hosting a Christian event for men, um, hosting overtly political figures. I don't really like that. And Charlie Kirk, I have no reason to think he's not a Christian. There are some people that think he's not. He seems like a Christian to me. I don't love him and all of his takes, but that being said, um, so they invited him, and people said, "Well, this is Promise Keepers being Christian nationalist." Um, and so I just asked some questions. I said, "Why do you think they are Christian nationalists just because they invited Charlie
Yeah.
Kirk to speak? What is it that's most reprehensible to you about Charlie Kirk and what he represents?" And so then they responded by saying, well, it's not just him, it's at least one other Turning Point person. So apparently Turning Point USA is not allowed to be invited to these sorts of things, which okay. Um, maybe they shouldn't be. Um, so so then I said, well, okay, let's say maybe they got the invitations. This isn't a great invitation. What would it even look like for this to be a Christian nationalist event? What if Charlie Kirk just gets up and talks about being pro-life? Um,
Mhm.
is is that a Christian nationalist trope? Just because Charlie Kirk, a face of Christian nationalism, which I'm not even sure if he is a Christian nationalist or not. I don't follow Charlie all that well because I don't find him all that compelling. But what would it look like? Well, the person I was talking to didn't respond, but someone else put Trump flags, period. I was like,
Jeez.
okay. So now Trump flags are Christian nationalists. Is that what you're telling me? Yes. He says, yes, anybody that votes for Trump, any Trump supporter is a Christian nationalist. There are, of course, Republicans who don't support Trump, as Haley has demonstrated, but any Trump supporter is a Christian nationalist. So
What
then I
about-
said,
What about some of my atheist friends that vote for Donald Trump? Are they Christian nationalists?
well, that's what this person said. That's what this person said. So we're going to get into
All right.
this. We're going to get into what I think is actually going on here. So then I said, oh, look at this. Anyone who voted or plans to vote for Trump is a Christian nationalist. And the person responded, said, no, not necessarily. A different person said, no, just like voting for Biden doesn't necessarily mean you're pro-choice. And then that person said, agreed. And I said, no, clearly you don't agree because you just said all Trump supporters are Christian nationalists. So I think what's happening with this Christian nationalist term and what's happening with people who accuse all Trump supporters of being white supremacists and things like that is something called a Mott and Bailey technique, a Mott and Bailey fallacy, right? Where if people don't know what it is, it's you say an outrageous term, and then when you say something that's outrageous, and then when you get hit with pushback, you retreat to a less more defensible and less outrageous claim. It comes from medieval warfare. A Mott and a Bailey, you'd retreat to the Bailey. So the Mott is all Trump supporters are white Christian nationalists. And you go, well, I mean, that's weird. What about, I don't know, Candace Owens? She's not white. And they go, oh, no. Well, what I mean is that people who think only white people should be able to vote are white Christian nationalists. Okay, well, yeah, now we're talking about something else, right?
Yeah.
So they retreat to a more defensible position. I don't know if that's a great example, but I think that's often what happened. That's often what happens in these conversations, especially with Christian nationalism. They'll throw, oh, look at this. This is white Christian nationalism, and the response is, how is this white Christian nationalism, and why are you conflating Christian nationalism with white Christian nationalism? Yeah. And then they'll retreat to the Bailey to a more defensible position, be like, well, hating Jews is wrong. Well, yeah, I agree. That's not what we were just talking about before, right? And so it'll be like, well, you think the nation you think only Christians should be allowed to vote. No, that's not what I said. That's not what Christian nationalism is, right? And then they retreat to a more defensible, well, you think that this nation was founded on Christian principles. So then when you engage with the Bailey, they then return right back to the Mott without even blinking an eye. So you go, oh, yeah, I agree. Our nation should be grounded in Christian principles. Like, see, so that means only Christian people should vote. And you're like, how do we get here? So that's the Mott and Bailey. And I think a lot of times that's what happened. That's what's happening when we're talking about the Christian national. And I just thought this Twitter exchange perfectly exemplified. It's like, only Trump flags. Okay, you never defined what was Christian nationalists about that event, just that you don't like Charlie Kirk. That's it. Okay, suppose I don't like him either. I need to know why it's Christian nationalist, right? Yeah. And why that's even bad. And you can maybe go, well, Promise Keepers just shouldn't be political. Okay, but that wasn't what you were saying before. You were saying they have gone full-blown Christian nationalist.
Yeah.
So you need to defend that position, not they just shouldn't be political. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I know we wanted to talk about that a little bit, but
yeah, no, I think the whole Mott and Bailey thing happens a lot about regarding the Christian nationalism thing, and then you'll often hear the attack, as you said, an attack on white Christian nationalism. We're like, okay, well, hold on a second. White Christian nationalism is oxymoronic, by the way, because if it was truly Christian, then it wouldn't be racist,
Yeah.
right? So
the modifier matters. White
really
is a modifier to the phrase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and although I have advanced the term Christian nationalism in the past. I was talking about this, I believe you were too, before Wolf's book came out, right?
Yeah.
I was publishing articles on this, didn't get the press that Wolf got, but I was publishing articles on this topic 3 years before Wolf's book on Christian nationalism came out. And I haven't read his book, but everything I've heard about him, like, no, he does not speak for all Christians who are nationalists. And I would oppose a lot of the stuff that he's writing about. But I've been careful to define what I mean by that in the past. So if you see our website, see our YouTube channel. But because of this confusion, I've recently been using the term American nationalist. And I've been clear that because I am a Christian, or if anybody is a true Christian, then they should be an American nationalist. And this is because Christian theology is perfectly compatible with America's theological foundations, namely that all humans possess objective and unalienable God-given rights that ought not be violated by anybody or any government. And on top of that, the role of any objectively good government is to protect those objective and unalienable God-given rights, to the exclusion or detriment of anyone or any nation who seeks to oppose these rights that are given to us by God. So if a nation is not opposing ultimate reality, then an objectively good nation will not seek the exclusion or detriment of that other nation. Indeed, they're going to be natural allies. And so, yeah, recently, just yesterday, I had somebody on social media say that I'm kind of abandoning what it means to be a nationalist, because I've said, hey, look, if you agree with America's philosophical and theological foundations, then you ought to be a nationalist. And he said, well, look, a nationalist means to the exclusion or detriment of other countries, not just those who oppose your foundation. And I said, well, look, if another nation is also defending the rights of all humans, then we're going to be natural allies. We both, our philosophical and theological foundations are compatible with their interests as well. But if one violates those, whether they're foreign or domestic, then a good Christian should be an American nationalist who seeks to defend those God-given rights of all humans. And then you would oppose those who oppose those objective and unalienable human rights to their exclusion or to their detriment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what would you add to that?
Yeah. Well, I think also it's important to note that exclusion doesn't necessarily mean isolationistic policy. Yeah. It means that you're not weighing in, we're going to exact this policy because it will benefit England. That policy might benefit England, but you're doing it not because it does. You're doing it because it benefits the United States of America, which means you can still be free trade and be an American nationalist because it will benefit America, not at the exclusion to say, we're going to purposefully exclude all other countries and become isolationistic, but at the exclusion of the desires of those other nations, right? So, hey, it might benefit a certain other nation for us to have this policy, but that's not the reason we're enacting it. It just happens to benefit them. So using that word exclusion to basically say, it's just isolationistic. There's a lot of nationalists that aren't isolationistic. It's just not globalist. It's not trying to force fealty to a certain cadre of people that are going to be able to decide what international relations ought to look like. Say, no, the United States will take care of the United States. The UN can butt out of it, sort of deal. So, Yeah. So that's the only thing I would add is exclusion doesn't necessarily mean isolation, as well. Um, yeah, we've been going for about an hour and a half now. If you haven't read the article yet, we will post it in the links below. I don't know if we've talked about everything we wanted to talk about in the article. If there's anything that we wanted to clarify, if you have questions,
Yeah,
put them in the comments.
that's right.
We would love to interact with and answer those.
Yeah.
And no, we are not telling you have to vote for Donald Trump. We're just
Nope.
saying that we do.
That's
So
right.
any other things, thoughts?
Well, to say, last week I was in Utah leading a Maven immersive experience with the Summit group out of Colorado Springs area, and what a great trip that was. Ryan Pauly and Micah Kunkel were on that trip, leading it with me, and during our free time, we were talking about Christian nationalism, American nationalism, and all these topics, which is good because normally we're talking about Molinism, but on this on this trip, most of it was focused on these topics that we're discussing today. So on the last day, right before I went to bed, Micah, with the help of AI, generated these pictures of me as a superhero called Captain American Nationalist. And
Yes. If you
got
want to
some
see
great,
what they look like, Tim's Facebook page is, I think, your profile picture, right?
yeah, it's one of them is
Yeah.
my current profile picture. I just laughed so hard. But I had some fun then, and I made a little backstory for Captain American Nationalist. And so let me read this to you, and
All right.
you can let me know what you think as we conclude here. But I said, Captain American Nationalist, this hero fights to protect the objective and unalienable God-given rights of all human, of all. All right, sorry, let me start over. Okay, here we go. Captain American Nationalist, this hero fights to protect the objective and unalienable God-given rights all humans possess, to the exclusion or detriment of any individual or government, foreign or domestic, who seeks to violate said rights. He has fought to free those in slavery, fights to defend innocent babies from being murdered, fights to defend confused children from being physically mutilated by evil adults, fights against Nazis, fights against racism. He knows what a woman is and fights for their rights. He fights for the rights of humans to defend themselves from evil and for the rights of humans to freely think and speak in the public square. And he opposes the evils of Marxism with every fiber of his being. Captain American Nationalist knows that Satan is behind the evil, all the evil listed above. He knows that our battle is not primarily against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, Ephesians 6:12. Finally, Captain American Nationalist strives to have sound theology. He is, first and foremost, a citizen of the kingdom of heaven and seeks to live according to its constitution, which is the law of Christ. Although he invites all to immigrate to heaven and to live according to its constitution, he will not force anyone to do so. Be that as it may, Captain American Nationalist realizes that those who reject this invitation are still created in the image of God and still possess objective and unalienable rights that ought to be protected. He has devoted his life to protecting God-given human rights and inviting everyone to eventually join him in God's kingdom. In the meantime, he realizes that America's theological foundations are objectively true and perfectly compatible with his Christian beliefs. So, because he is a Christian, he affirms and advances America's interests to the exclusion or detriment of any who would oppose God-given rights. So, what do you think of
All right.
this hero so far? Do I need to edit anything?
I don't know. It was good. I was captivated. I think it's better than whatever Disney's doing with Marvel. So we should
Or with Star Wars.
Yeah. Yes.
Talk about DEI. DEI is not only dangerous when you're talking about surgeons and pilots, but it's completely destroying Star Wars. And you know what? So many people are starting to see that right now.
Yeah, that's just a bridge too far. It's just a bridge too far. Touch my surgeons if you will. Okay. Touch my Jedis, you will not. All right.
That's right.
The Sith are not the good guys.
No.
Guys. Come on.
Yeah.
The power dynamics. Oh man, don't get me on this. Don't get me on
this. That's another topic. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, maybe we should do a deconstructing Disney session or something.
That's right.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think you said it perfectly well there. I do want to remind people that if you are watching this and you've made it this far, you are a trooper, and we thank you for your attention. We also invite you to like and subscribe here at FreeThinking Ministries YouTube. We are on the march to 6,000 subscribers. We'd love to get there with your help and have more conversations like this. What would you like Tim and I to debate or discuss next? Why don't you put those things in the comments as well? And we would love to interact with more things like that. We may have more things coming up in the future as far as being able to discuss some of these ideas on some other channels. Nothing to announce right now, but we're looking forward to the opportunity to discuss this article and other things as we help the church to engage with the culture as best that we can. So, Tim, any parting shots for the people out in the YouTube sphere?
Stay reasonable.
That's right. Stay reasonable. We will see you next time.